I am Coco, 32 years old, a freelance graphic designer based in Chicago. After years of hard work, I finally built my own successful design business. But the road here was anything but smooth, especially with my family. All my life, I lived in my brother Jackson's shadow. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Then last month, I got that phone call from my parents asking for more financial support. When I questioned them, my dad sneered, "You will never be as good as your brother." That comparison was the last straw. If you have experienced family comparison, drop a comment below about where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know if you have ever been compared to a sibling. Growing up in a middle-class suburb of Minneapolis, my childhood looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial house with the white picket fence family barbecues in summer and ski trips in winter painted an idyllic American family portrait. But inside those walls, I was constantly reminded that I was the lesser child, the disappointment, the one who could never measure up to my brilliant older brother. Jackson was 5 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, he was perfection personified. His report cards were adorned with straight A's. His bedroom shelves sagged under the weight of trophies from swimming debate team and chess competitions. Teachers praised his intelligence coaches, admired his discipline, and neighbors commented on his politeness. He was the golden child, and I was perpetually in his shadow. "Why can't you be more like Jackson?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I brought home a B+ in math, my father would sigh and say, "Jackson never got anything less than an A in mathematics." When I struggled with science projects, my mother would shake her head and remind me, "Your brother won the state science fair when he was even younger than you." I tried everything to earn their approval. I learned to play piano hoping my musical talent would impress them. "Jackson mastered Chopin by your age," my mother commented after my recital, completely dismissing the Mozart piece I had practiced for months. I joined the art club and discovered I had a natural talent for visual arts. My watercolor painting won first place in a school competition, but my parents barely glanced at it when I proudly brought it home. "Art is a nice hobby, Coco, but it won't get you anywhere in life," my father said dismissively. "Jackson is taking advanced placement classes that will set him up for success." The painting ended up in my closet, instead of on our living room wall, where Jackson's debate team certificates were prominently displayed. Even our extended family perpetuated the comparison. At Thanksgiving, dinner's relatives would first ask Jackson about his academic achievements and athletic victories, then turn to me with that slightly pitying look. "And what about you, Coco?" Still drawing those little pictures, they would ask their tone, making it clear they viewed my artistic pursuits as childish compared to Jackson's serious accomplishments. I became invisible in my own home. At dinner, the conversation revolved around Jackson's latest achievement or the bright future ahead of him. When I tried to share something about my day, or my own small victories, the topic would quickly shift back to my brother. I learned to eat quietly and excuse myself early, retreating to my bedroom, where I could escape into my sketchbooks and create worlds where I was valued for being me. By high school, I had developed a protective shell. I stopped trying to compete with Jackson because I knew I would never win in my parents' eyes. Instead, I focused on finding my own path. I took every art and design class available, stayed late after school to use the art room facilities, and built a portfolio of work that I was genuinely proud of. My art teacher, Mrs. Thornton, became my biggest supporter, seeing potential in me that my family never acknowledged. "You have a unique perspective, Coco," she told me one afternoon as I worked on a digital design project. "Your brother may excel in traditional academics, but you have a gift that is just as valuable. Never forget that." Her words were a lifeline for me. a rare validation that I clung to during those difficult years. The contrast between how my parents treated us was never more apparent than during our high school graduations. When Jackson graduated, my parents threw an extravagant party. They invited extended family neighbors and even his teachers. They rented a party tent for our backyard hired caterers, and my father gave a 20-minute speech praising Jackson's accomplishments and bright future at an Ivy League university. 4 years later, when it was my turn to graduate, we went to a restaurant for a quick dinner. No party, no guests, no speech. My mother did take a few photos, but she seemed more interested in discussing Jackson's recent internship at a prestigious financial firm than celebrating my milestone. When I mentioned my acceptance to the Art Institute of Chicago with a partial scholarship, my father frowned. "Are you sure about this art school thing, Coco? It's not too late to apply to a real university, you know. Something with better career prospects." My mother nodded in agreement. "Your brother is already setting himself up for a successful career. We just want the same for you, honey." What they really meant was, "We want you to be just like Jackson." But by then I knew that would never happen. And deep down, despite the hurt, I was starting to realize that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Leaving for college was like taking my first real breath after years of suffocation. The Art Institute of Chicago was over 400 miles from Minneapolis, and that distance felt like both a physical and emotional liberation. I remember the day my parents dropped me off at my dorm. The contrast between my send-off and Jackson's was stark. For him, they had taken a week off work, helped him settle in, met his roommate's family, and taken everyone out for an expensive dinner. For me, they drove me down on a Saturday, unloaded my few belongings, and were back on the road by mid-afternoon, citing the need to get back for work on Monday. Their disappointment in my choice was palpable. Graphic design, my father had scoffed when I announced my major. What kind of stable career will that lead to? Jackson studied economics and finance. Those are fields with real prospects. My mother, attempting to be supportive in her own way, had added, "Honey, we just want you to be able to support yourself. This art thing seems so uncertain." What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this independence for years. Unlike Jackson, who had his entire education funded by our parents, I knew I would be largely on my own. The partial scholarship covered about half my tuition, but everything else would be up to me. Within a week of arriving in Chicago, I had secured 2 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus, and weekend work at a local print shop where I could also learn practical skills related to my field. My schedule was grueling. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get to the coffee shop by 5 work until 9, then rush to classes until late afternoon. 3 evenings a week, I would work on freelance design projects I found through campus bulletin boards and online forums. Weekends were spent at the print shop, learning about paper stocks, binding techniques, and industrial printers from the owner, an old-school graphic designer named Frank, who took me under his wing. "You got a good eye, kid," he would tell me as I helped design business cards and brochures for local businesses. Better than half the design school graduates I've seen come through here. Despite the exhaustion, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was being valued for my own talents. My roommate, Lydia, a photography major from Seattle, was the first person who ever looked at my work with genuine appreciation rather than comparison. "Coco, this is amazing!" she exclaimed when she saw the poster I designed for the Student Film Festival. "You have such a distinctive style. I've never seen anyone approach composition quite like you do." Her praise felt foreign to me. I was so used to being found wanting that I hardly knew how to respond to sincere admiration. But slowly, surrounded by people who appreciated creativity and original thinking, I began to rebuild my shattered self-confidence. Professor Gabriel Martinez was particularly influential. In my second year, he pulled me aside after his advanced typography class. "Miss Walker, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I rarely see the kind of intuitive understanding of visual hierarchy that you possess. Have you considered applying for the summer internship at Meridian Design?" I hadn't assuming such prestigious opportunities were for students more talented than me, but with his encouragement I applied, and to my shock, was accepted. That summer internship led to connections that would later prove invaluable to my career. Meanwhile, my phone calls home became increasingly infrequent. Each conversation followed the same pattern: brief inquiries about my studies, followed by lengthy updates about Jackson's flourishing career at Goldman Sachs. He had been promoted, he had moved to a luxury apartment, he was dating the daughter of a partner at the firm. "Your brother just got a performance bonus. That's probably more than you will make in your first year after graduation," my father mentioned during one call, not even trying to hide the comparison. I began to dread those conversations, each one reinforcing that no matter what I achieved, it would never measure up to Jackson's accomplishments in their eyes. So I called less and less, throwing myself into building my portfolio and network instead. By my senior year, I had amassed an impressive body of work, won several student design competitions, and secured a job offer from a boutique design agency in Chicago for after graduation. Professor Martinez even featured my work in a faculty exhibition, an honor rarely bestowed on undergraduates. "You should invite your parents," he suggested. "They would be proud to see your work displayed alongside established artists." I called them with the news, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. "It's a pretty big deal," I explained. "Only 3 students were selected." "That sounds nice, honey," my mother replied distractedly. "Listen, we wanted to tell you we probably won't make it to your graduation ceremony. Your father has some important meetings that week, and Jackson is taking us on a trip to Bermuda with some of his airline miles. You understand, right?" I understood perfectly. I attended my graduation ceremony alone, but not really alone. Lydia and her parents were there cheering for me. Frank from the print shop brought his wife and a bouquet of flowers. Professor Martinez shook my hand proudly as I crossed the stage. I had built my own support system, people, who valued me for exactly who I was. That night, as my friends and mentors celebrated with me at a local restaurant, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents' approval to know my own worth. It was a painful realization, but also liberating. I was finally becoming my own person, free from the shadow of comparison that had darkened my childhood. The first few years after college were a steep learning curve. I started at Horizon Design, a small but respected agency in Chicago, making barely enough to cover rent for my tiny studio apartment and my student loan payments. My workspace was literally a corner of my living room with a second-hand desk I found on Craigslist and a refurbished computer that struggled with the hefty design software. But I was determined to make it work. Unlike many of my colleagues who received financial support from their families while establishing their careers, I was completely on my own. I budgeted meticulously meal prepped to avoid eating out and found free networking events where I could build professional connections while enjoying the complimentary appetizers. Every dollar mattered. Then 8 months into my new job, I received a call from my mother that would change everything. "Your father is sick," she said, her voice uncharacteristically fragile. "The doctors found some abnormalities in his heart. He needs surgery and our insurance doesn't cover everything. We're struggling with the medical bills." My father, the stoic provider who had never admitted weakness, was now facing a health crisis. Despite our complicated relationship, the news hit me hard. Without hesitation, I asked, "How much do you need?" The amount she mentioned would wipe out most of my emergency savings. But family was family. I'll transfer the money tomorrow, I promised. What started as a one-time assistance soon became a monthly obligation. After my father's surgery, there were ongoing medications, follow-up appointments, and therapy sessions. My mother had reduced her working hours to care for him, further straining their finances. I began sending $500 every month, a significant portion of my entry-level salary. During one of our calls, I cautiously asked if Jackson was also helping with the expenses. There was an uncomfortable pause before my mother answered. Your brother is at a critical point in his career right now. He has his mortgage payments, country club membership, and he's saving for a partnership buy-in at his firm. He has a lot of financial commitments. The implication was clear: Jackson's money was for his future, while mine was expected to support our parents. Despite earning significantly more than me, he was somehow exempt from financial responsibility toward the family. Even more hurtful was that despite my sacrifices, the comparisons never stopped. During one visit home, as I handed my mother an envelope with extra cash I had earned from a freelance project, she sighed wistfully. Jackson just bought a vacation property in Aspen. Can you imagine? He said we can use it any time. He's always been so thoughtful. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out the irony of praising his generosity with a vacation home while I was the one actually keeping their lights on. Instead, I smiled tightly and changed the subject. To meet my growing financial obligations, I began taking on freelance projects during evenings and weekends. My tiny apartment became even more cramped as I accumulated the equipment needed for professional design work. My social life dwindled to nearly nothing as I juggled my day job and side hustles. Some weeks I worked 70 hours or more, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. The strain began to show. I developed chronic migraines from the long hours staring at screens. Dark circles became a permanent feature under my eyes. Friends stopped inviting me out, knowing I would decline due to deadlines or exhaustion. But I kept going, sending that monthly payment home without fail, even when it meant postponing my own dreams of starting my own design studio. About 3 years into this arrangement, I received an elegant cream-colored envelope in the mail. It was an invitation to Jackson's wedding to Sophia, the daughter of a senior partner at his firm. The event would be held at an exclusive resort in Napa Valley, California. At the bottom of the invitation in small print, black tie required. Just attending would cost me nearly $2,000 between airfare, hotel, appropriate attire, and a gift. Money I didn't have to spare. But I knew that not attending my only brother's wedding would create a family rift I wasn't prepared to deal with. So I picked up yet another freelance project, designing a catalog for a furniture company, working through multiple weekends to earn the extra money. I maxed out my credit card for a plane ticket and found the least expensive black dress that could pass for formal wear at a high-end wedding. The wedding weekend was a showcase of wealth and privilege. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Throughout the event, my parents beamed with pride at Jackson, the successful son who had made it. They introduced me to their friends. As our daughter, she does something with computers and art, unable to even correctly describe my profession. At the reception, I overheard my father talking to his brother, my Uncle Robert. Jackson's really secured his future with this marriage. The connections alone are worth their weight in gold. And look at this venue, the people here. He moves in important circles now. Uncle Robert nodded appreciatively, then glanced in my direction. And what about Coco? Is she doing well for herself too? My father's response was a dismissive wave. She's still figuring things out. You know how artists are always struggling. But we're hopeful she'll eventually find something more stable. I had been sending them money for 3 years at that point, often at the expense of my own financial security. Yet in their eyes, I was still the directionless child, while Jackson, who contributed nothing to the family finances, was the model of success. That night in my hotel room, I cried for the first time in years. Not just because of the hurtful words, but because I realized I was trapped in a cycle of seeking approval that would never come. No matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, I would always be second best in their eyes. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to stop sending money. They were my parents, and they needed help. So I returned to Chicago, back to my grueling schedule, and monthly transfers, still hoping that someday they would see my value even if it didn't match their expectations. As the years passed, my career began to gain momentum. The long hours and relentless networking gradually paid off, and my reputation in Chicago's design community grew. By my 5th year in the industry, I had moved from Horizon Design to a more prestigious firm, commanding a considerably higher salary and working with national brands. My portfolio expanded to include award-winning campaigns for a popular athleisure brand, a complete rebranding for a chain of organic grocery stores, and digital marketing materials for a major airline. Design blogs featured my work, and I was invited to speak at a few industry conferences about my approach to integrating traditional graphic design principles with digital experiences. At 29, I finally took the leap and launched my own studio, Prism Design. It was a terrifying but exhilarating move. I rented a small office space in a converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, invested in professional-grade equipment, and hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks. The first few months were nail-biting, as I wondered if I had made a catastrophic mistake, but gradually clients followed me from my previous firm and new ones came through referrals. Through all of this professional growth, I continued sending money home every month without fail. It had been 8 years since I started supporting my parents financially, and the amount had gradually increased from $500 to $800 monthly as their needs grew and my income improved. I never missed a payment, even during the lean months when I first started my business, and wasn't sure if I could make rent. What became increasingly strange was that my parents rarely acknowledged these contributions. Our phone conversations, now down to once every few weeks, revolved almost exclusively around Jackson's latest achievements. He had been promoted to senior vice president. He and Sophia had purchased a second home in the Hamptons. They were expecting their first child and had already secured a spot at an exclusive preschool with a wait list longer than my arm. "Jackson is taking us to Europe this summer," my mother announced during one call. "2 weeks in France and Italy. He insists on flying us business class. Isn't that generous?" I swallowed the bitter retort that rose to my lips. Jackson could afford such grand gestures precisely because he wasn't supporting them month to month. My consistent financial support enabled their everyday life, while his occasional splashy gifts earned him endless praise. When I did try to share news about my own life, the response was lukewarm at best. After winning a prestigious industry award, I excitedly called to tell them. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly. "Oh, before I forget, did you see the photos Jackson sent of their new vacation home? 4,500 square feet right on the beach? The virtual tour is absolutely stunning." My achievements seemed to evaporate in the brilliant light of Jackson's success. I began to share less and less about my life, knowing it would only lead to disappointment. Our relationship became increasingly transactional, centered around my monthly financial support rather than any meaningful connection. Then, during a particularly difficult period when several major client projects overlapped, I missed their calls for nearly 3 weeks. When I finally had a moment to breathe and called back, my father answered with unusual coldness. "Well, look who finally remembered she has parents." I apologized and explained about my workload, but he seemed uninterested. There was an odd tension in his voice that I couldn't quite place. When I asked if everything was okay, he hesitated before responding. "Everything's fine. Your mother wants to talk to you." Our conversation was strained, with none of the usual updates about Jackson. Instead, they asked pointed questions about my business, whether it was doing well, if I was financially stable. At the time, I attributed their sudden interest in my career to genuine concern, perhaps even a belated recognition of my hard work. How wrong I was. A month later, I decided to surprise them with a visit. I had a potential client meeting in Minneapolis and arranged to stay an extra day to see my parents. I hadn't been home in over a year, and despite our complicated relationship, I missed them. I didn't tell them I was coming, thinking it would be a nice surprise. When I pulled into their driveway on a Thursday afternoon, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked in front of the garage. Perhaps they had visitors. I rang the doorbell gift bag in hand, containing an expensive bottle of scotch for my father and a silk scarf for my mother. My mother opened the door, and her face registered shock rather than pleasure. "Coco, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, I heard a familiar voice from inside the house. "Mom, who is it?" Jackson stepped into view behind her wearing casual clothes and holding a coffee mug as if he lived there. Which, as I would soon discover, he did. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with unspoken tension as we all sat down. My mother nervously offered coffee and snacks, while my father seemed unable to meet my eyes. Jackson, normally confident to the point of arrogance, was uncharacteristically quiet. "I had no idea you were in town, Jackson," I said, breaking the awkward silence. "Are you and Sophia visiting for the weekend?" The uncomfortable glances exchanged between them told me something was very wrong. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Your brother has been staying with us for a while," he admitted reluctantly. "Just until he gets back on his feet." Back on his feet? The golden child, who supposedly had a VP position and multiple homes, needed to get back on his feet. It made no sense. "What happened?" I asked, looking directly at Jackson. His perfect facade cracked as he explained that he had lost his job nearly 10 months ago. The firm had downsized, and despite his connections, he had been let go. Shortly after his marriage had fallen apart under the financial strain and Sophia's disappointment in his career failure, most of their assets were in her name or tied up in the divorce proceedings. He had been living with our parents since then, looking for work, but struggling in the competitive financial sector where reputation was everything. I was stunned, not just by his reversal of fortune, but by the realization that my parents had kept this from me for nearly a year, all while continuing to accept my financial support. Every month I had sent money thinking it was for my father's medical expenses, while in reality it was helping to support my unemployed brother. The betrayal cut deep, but I kept my composure, asking questions and trying to understand the full picture. As the conversation unfolded, I began to see just how much had been hidden from me over the years. 2 weeks after my unexpected discovery at my parents' house, I received a call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was working late at my studio, finalizing designs for a major pitch the next day. When my phone rang with my parents' number, I almost let it go to voicemail, still processing my feelings about their deception, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Coco, it's Dad." His tone was different than usual, more hesitant. "Do you have a minute to talk about something important?" I saved my work and leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening." What followed was a carefully constructed story about increased expenses. My father's medication costs had gone up, The house needed urgent repairs, including a new roof and water heater. Property taxes had increased significantly. The subtext was clear: they needed more money. "We were wondering if you could increase your monthly contribution," my father finally said. "An additional $300 would make a big difference for us right now." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mix of obligation and resentment. But this time, there was something new: anger. For 8 years, I had sacrificed my own financial security to help them, believing it was for my father's health needs. Now I knew at least part of that money had been supporting my brother, the supposed success story. "Is this for your expenses?" I asked carefully. "Or is it for Jackson?" There was a telling pause before my father responded defensively. "What difference does that make? We're family. We support each other." "That's exactly my point, Dad. I've been supporting you and Mom for 8 years. I've never missed a payment, even when I could barely make my own rent. Meanwhile, Jackson has contributed what exactly?" My mother's voice suddenly joined the conversation. She must have been listening on another extension. "Your brother is going through a difficult time, Coco. He lost everything. And I've been losing my financial freedom for nearly a decade," I countered. "But you never saw that as a hardship, because it's just me, just Coco, just the less important child." "That's not fair," my father protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When was the last time either of you asked about my business, my life, my struggles? It's always been all about Jackson, even when I'm the one paying your bills." The conversation was rapidly escalating, years of suppressed feelings finally finding voice. My parents defended Jackson, explaining how hard job hunting was at his age and level how depressed he had become after his divorce, how he needed family support more than ever. "And what about my needs?" I asked. "Did you ever consider what it cost me to send you money every month all these years? The opportunities I had to pass up, the savings? I couldn't build the stress of carrying that responsibility alone." My questions were met with uncomfortable silence. Then my father said the words that would finally break the dam. "Coco, try to understand. Your brother had real success, a real career. He fell from a great height. Your graphic arts thing, it's different. You will never be as good as your brother. You haven't lost what he has lost." The familiar comparison, the dismissal of my entire professional life as a thing, rather than a legitimate career, and the declaration that I would never measure up to Jackson, even when he was unemployed and living with our parents. It was all too much. "Then ask him to pay all the bills," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I am not sending money anymore." There was a shocked gasp from my mother. "What money? We never received a single dollar from you." Her words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Had I misheard? Was this some kind of sick joke? "What did you just say?" I finally managed to ask. "I said we never received money from you," my mother repeated, sounding genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" My mind raced through 8 years of bank transfers, all those months of sacrifice, the acknowledgments from my parents when they received each payment. Had it all been a lie, a delusion? "Mom, I've been sending $800 every month for the past 4 years and $500 before that. For 8 years. Are you seriously claiming you never received any of it?" Another uncomfortable silence fell. I could hear my parents conferring in hushed tones, their confusion seeming genuine. "Coco, my father finally said we never received any regular payments from you. There was that one time after my surgery, but nothing monthly like you're describing." I felt sick to my stomach as a terrible suspicion began to form. Who handles your banking? Who would have access to your accounts? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jackson. It had always been Jackson. I need to go, I said abruptly. I'll call you back. As soon as I hung up, I pulled up my banking records on my computer. There they were, dozens upon dozens of transfers to what I believed was my parents' joint account. An account that I now realized, with growing horror, must have been controlled by my brother. For 8 years I had been sending money not to support my parents, but directly into Jackson's pockets. The golden child, the successful son, had been stealing from me all along. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour, staring at the evidence on my screen. Then, with shaking hands, I began to gather all the documentation. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The revelation that my money had never reached my parents left me reeling. I took 2 days off work, something I rarely did, just to process what had happened and figure out my next steps. My first action was to compile all the evidence. I printed out 8 years of bank statements, highlighting each transfer. I organized them chronologically in a binder, creating a paper trail of Jackson's deception. The account I had been sending money to was indeed in my parents' names, but as I dug deeper, I discovered it was a joint account that also included Jackson as an authorized user. This explained how he had been able to access the funds without my parents' knowledge. But I needed more concrete proof before confronting my family. On the recommendation of a client who was an attorney, I hired Trevor Miles, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. He was expensive, but I needed to know exactly what had happened to my money and have evidence that would be irrefutable. This kind of family financial fraud is more common than you might think, Trevor told me during our initial consultation, especially when one family member is perceived as more financially successful or responsible than others. Over the next 3 weeks, Trevor traced the movement of funds from the joint account. What he uncovered was both shocking and infuriating. Within days of each of my deposits, Jackson would transfer the money to his personal account. Sometimes he would forge checks with my father's signature. Other times he would make electronic transfers. He had effectively been intercepting my financial support for years, using it to maintain the illusion of success even after he lost his job. Based on the documentation I've gathered, he's taken approximately $75,000 from you over 8 years, Trevor explained as he showed me his findings. And I've confirmed your parents never saw a penny of it. The amount was staggering. $75,000 that could have gone toward my student loans, a down payment on a home, or investing in my business. Instead, it had funded Jackson's lifestyle, and more recently supported him during his unemployment, all while he maintained the fiction of success and generosity to our parents. Armed with Trevor's detailed report and all my own documentation, I booked a flight to Minneapolis. This confrontation needed to happen in person. I called my parents to let them know I was coming, simply saying I had important family matters to discuss. I deliberately didn't mention Jackson, but I asked if they could ensure he would be present as well. The flight to Minneapolis was the longest 2 hours of my life. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would present the evidence, trying to prepare for every possible reaction. Would they believe me? Would they defend Jackson? Would they try to minimize what he had done? When I arrived at their house, everyone was there as requested. My mother had prepared coffee and pastries, as if this were a normal family gathering. Jackson sat in the living room, looking nervous but maintaining his composure. My father seemed confused about the purpose of this sudden family meeting. I declined the offer of refreshments and got straight to the point. I opened my binder and placed it on the coffee table. For the past 8 years, I have been sending money to support you and Dad, I said, looking directly at my mother. Every month without fail. The money was sent to what I believed was your joint account. My mother shook her head. Coco, we've been through this. We never received any regular payments from you. You're right, Mom. You never did, I agreed, because Jackson has been taking it all. Jackson immediately protested, his face flushing with anger. That's ridiculous. How dare you come here and make accusations like that? My father placed a hand on Jackson's arm to calm him, then turned to me with a stern expression. Coco, this is a very serious allegation. Do you have any proof of what you're claiming? I have all the proof we need, I replied, calmly opening the binder. Bank statements showing every transfer I made over 8 years. Records of those funds being moved to Jackson's personal account, usually within days of my deposits. And this. I pulled out a folder containing copies of checks with my father's forged signature, alongside samples of his actual signature and Jackson's handwriting for comparison. Trevor had been thorough in his investigation. And I have statements from your bank confirming that none of these transfers were ever reflected in your actual monthly expenses, I continued. The money never paid for Dad's medications or the house repairs or anything else for your household. It all went directly to Jackson. The room fell silent as my parents looked through the evidence. My mother's hands trembled as she examined the forged checks. My father's face grew increasingly pale as he flipped through page after page of bank statements. Jackson's defiance crumbled in the face of such overwhelming evidence. His denials became weaker, then shifted to excuses. I was going to pay it back, he insisted. It was just temporary, when I got back on my feet. 8 years is not temporary, I interrupted. And you weren't in trouble for most of that time. You were employed at Goldman Sachs, earning more than enough to support yourself. You took my money because you could, because you felt entitled to it. My father looked up from the documents, his expression a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. Jackson, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from your sister all these years. Jackson couldn't meet his eyes. His silence was confirmation enough. My mother began to cry softly at first, then with deep, racking sobs. How could you do this to your own sister, to us? The golden child's facade had finally shattered completely. Jackson sat with his head in his hands, unable to offer any defense that could justify his actions. I trusted you, my father said, his voice breaking. We all trusted you. You handled our finances, our accounts, everything. We believed in you. It was the first time I had ever seen my father look at Jackson with anything other than pride and admiration. Now there was only pain and betrayal in his eyes. All those times you told us how Coco never helped, my mother whispered. All those times you said she was too busy with her career to care about family. You were lying to us about our own daughter. Jackson remained silent, defeated by the weight of his own deception. I felt no triumph in this moment, only a profound sadness. This revelation wasn't just about the money, substantial as that loss was. It was about years of damaged relationships, missed opportunities for connection, and a false narrative that had shaped our family dynamics. There's more, I said quietly. The trips you thought Jackson paid for, the gifts, the dinners at expensive restaurants, all the generous gestures you praised him for over the years, those were funded with my money too. My father stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to the room. His shoulders shook slightly, and I realized with shock that he was crying. I had never seen my father cry before. All these years, he said. Without turning around, we thought you didn't care, Coco, that you were too wrapped up in your own life to think about us. And all this time you were the one supporting us, and we didn't even know it. My mother reached for my hand across the coffee table. Can you ever forgive us for not seeing the truth? For all the comparisons, all the times we made you feel less than. The question caught me off guard. I had come prepared for denial, for them to defend Jackson for resistance to the truth. I hadn't expected immediate remorse or a request for forgiveness. I don't know, I answered honestly. It's not just about the money. It's about a lifetime of being made to feel I wasn't good enough, that my achievements didn't matter, that I would never measure up to Jackson. The money is just part of a much larger pattern. Jackson finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. It started small. After your first payment, I was in a tight spot, financially overextended on my credit cards. I thought I would just borrow a little and pay it back. But then it became easy to take more, and then it became a habit, and then you couldn't maintain the lie of success without it. I finished for him. He nodded miserably. The more I took, the more I had to lie about how well I was doing, and the more I lied, the more I needed to keep taking to support those lies. It was a vicious cycle I couldn't break. What happens now? My mother asked, looking between us. It was the question I had been asking myself on the flight here. What did I want to come from this confrontation? Revenge, repayment, justice? The answer wasn't simple. First, Jackson needs to acknowledge everything he did in writing, I said firmly. The total amount taken, how it was taken, and over what period of time. Trevor, my investigator, has prepared a document that outlines everything. Jackson, you need to sign it. He nodded without protest. Second, we need to discuss repayment, I continued. I know you can't pay it all back immediately, but we need a formal agreement. I'll sign whatever you need, Jackson said quietly. And I'll find a way to pay back every cent, no matter how long it takes. Third, I said, looking at my parents, we need to talk about moving forward as a family, about rebuilding trust, about changing how we relate to each other. That's going to be the hardest part. My father turned from the window and faced me. The proud, judgmental man who had shaped so much of my self-doubt was gone, replaced by someone who looked older, humbled, and deeply ashamed. We failed you, Coco, he said simply. Not just by not seeing what Jackson was doing, but by not seeing you. The real you, your strength, your talent, your success on your own terms. I don't know if we can fix that, but I want to try if you'll let us. It was what I had wanted to hear for so long, an acknowledgement of my worth that wasn't tied to a comparison with Jackson. But it had come at such a high cost, and I wasn't sure if the damage could be undone. I need time, I said honestly. This isn't something we can resolve in one conversation. I came here for the truth, and now we have it. What we do with that truth will take longer to figure out. As I prepared to leave, Jackson approached me hesitantly. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for the money, but for everything. For being the standard they measured you against. For never standing up for you. For letting my own insecurities turn me into someone who could do this to his own sister. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. Seeing him, not as the golden child or the thief, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made terrible choices. I believe you're sorry, Jackson. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. It's just the first step in a very long process. As I drove away from my childhood home that day, I felt oddly lighter despite the heaviness of what had transpired. The truth, painful as it was, had finally set me free from a lifetime of trying to prove my worth to people who had been deceived about my contributions all along. What would happen next, I didn't know, but for the first time I felt like I was facing my family on equal terms, no longer the lesser child trying desperately to measure up. The aftermath of that confrontation was both painful and transformative. In the days following, my parents consulted with their attorney and then made a difficult decision. They filed a police report against Jackson. It was not something I had asked them to do or even expected, but they felt it was necessary to hold him accountable. "It's not just about what he did to you," my father explained when he called to tell me. "It's about what he did to all of us, the lies, the manipulation. We can't pretend it didn't happen or handle it just within the family. There have to be consequences." Jackson was charged with fraud and forgery. Because of the substantial amount involved and the duration of his deception, these were serious charges. Ultimately, he accepted a plea deal that included restitution, probation, and community service, avoiding jail time but creating a permanent record of his actions. The legal proceedings were just one aspect of the fallout. Far more complex was the emotional reckoning that followed. My parents and I began the slow, often awkward process of rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. It started with weekly phone calls that were initially stilted and uncomfortable, both sides unsure how to relate to each other without the false narrative that had shaped our interactions for so long. 3 months after the confrontation, my parents suggested therapy, both individual and family sessions. I was surprised by their willingness to examine their own behavior and biases, a level of self-reflection I had never witnessed from them before. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my mother said during one of our early sessions with Dr. Laura Hoffman, a family therapist in Minneapolis, "about why we always favored Jackson, why we couldn't see Coco's value on her own terms." My father, who had always been emotionally reserved, struggled visibly with these conversations. "I think I saw in Jackson what I wanted to be," he admitted during one particularly intense session. "The traditional success, the financial world, the status. And in Coco I saw a path I didn't understand and therefore couldn't value. That was my failure, not hers." For my part, I had to confront my own role in our dysfunctional family system, how I had continued to seek their approval even as an adult, how I had enabled Jackson's deception by never directly confirming with my parents that they were receiving my support. "You were conditioned from childhood to believe your worth was less," Dr. Hoffman explained to me. "Breaking that conditioning is hard work. And it's work that all of you need to do, not just you alone." As for Jackson, his path was perhaps the most difficult. After the legal proceedings concluded, he moved to Seattle for a fresh start, taking a job at a much smaller financial firm with a significant pay cut. Our relationship was the slowest to heal, understandably so. We began with occasional emails, then graduated to monthly phone calls that were carefully cordial but lacked the ease of true forgiveness. "I'm in therapy too," he told me during one call about a year after everything had come to light, "trying to understand why I did what I did. The therapist thinks I was terrified of losing my position as the favorite child, that I created this elaborate fiction because I couldn't bear to be seen as a failure." "And what do you think I asked?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I think I was jealous of you," he said finally. "Of your authenticity, your passion for your work, the fact that you built something real while I was just playing a role I thought I was supposed to play. It's no excuse for what I did, but that's what I'm working through." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, a small step towards something that might one day resemble a genuine sibling relationship. Meanwhile, my design business flourished. The time and energy I had previously devoted to trying to earn my family's approval was now channeled into creative work and building meaningful relationships. I expanded Prism Design, hiring 3 full-time designers and moving to a larger studio space. My client list grew to include national brands, and I was featured in several industry publications. More importantly, I built a support network of friends who valued me for exactly who I was. Lydia, my college roommate, moved to Chicago after a divorce, and we reconnected our friendship deeper and more authentic than ever. I started dating Michael, a kind and thoughtful architect who appreciated my creative perspective and encouraged my ambitions. 2 years after the confrontation, I felt ready to take a significant step in my healing journey. I invited my parents to Chicago to see my studio, meet my team, and understand the world I had built for myself. It was the first time they had ever visited me in my professional environment. "This is incredible, Coco," my father said, as he looked around at the awards on the walls, the designs displayed in the portfolio area, the busy creative space filled with talented people who respected me as their leader. There was genuine awe in his voice, free from comparisons or qualifications. My mother, examining a national campaign I had designed for a children's literacy organization, wiped away tears. "We missed so much," she said quietly. "All these years we never really saw you." That evening over dinner at my favorite restaurant, my father raised his glass in a toast. To Coco, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who succeeded not because of our support, but despite our failure to provide it. "We are so proud of you, daughter. Not for what you've achieved, though, that is remarkable, but for who you are." It wasn't a magical cure for all the hurt of the past, but it was a moment of genuine acknowledgement that meant more than any comparison or validation I had sought in my younger years. The greatest lesson I learned through this painful journey was that my worth was never dependent on their recognition of it. The validation I had desperately sought from my parents could only truly come from within myself. By trying to measure up to their standards, to Jackson's accomplishments, I had been chasing an illusion that would never satisfy my soul. True fulfillment came not from external approval, but from living authentically, pursuing my passions with integrity, and creating work that expressed my unique vision. The people who truly mattered in my life were those who saw and appreciated me for exactly who I was, not who they wished I would be. Today, my relationship with my family is different, more honest, with healthier boundaries. We are not perfect, and the scars of our past still surface occasionally, but we are learning to relate to each other as the people we actually are, rather than the roles we once played in our family drama. Jackson and I maintain a cautious relationship. He has repaid about 20% of what he took, making monthly payments that he has never missed. More importantly, he has maintained his commitment to therapy and personal growth, gradually becoming someone I might one day fully trust again. As for me, I no longer define myself in relation to anyone else, especially not my brother. I am Coco Walker, a successful designer, a loyal friend, a woman who faced a devastating betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. My worth is not measured by comparison to others, but by the integrity with which I live my life and the positive impact I create in the world around me. If you have ever felt like the lesser child in your family, if you have struggled to break free from unfair comparisons, or to have your unique gifts recognized, I hope my story offers some comfort and courage. Your value does not depend on others' ability to see it. You are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are, not as someone else thinks you should be. What about you? Have you experienced similar family dynamics or had to redefine your self-worth beyond others' expectations? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are enough just as they are. Thank you for listening, and remember, your unique path is valid and valuable, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise.